in this case, unfortunately, it is quite disappointing to see Sydney promoting something which I deem to be very ineffective. We are back in business today, and it's a bit of a double whammy to some extent, but it's not really a double whammy, is it? We're actually going to look at something that was sent to me, which is Sydney's new Arise series, which seems to be quite resistance training focused, which obviously appeals to me, very interesting, and you know I am a bit of a fan of Sydney. I think she's producing some bloody good content. This workout in particular has led to a few questions. It actually got me pondering something, is that I don't think I've ever really spoken about direct arm training. So really training the biceps and the triceps before. And I figured this would be a really great opportunity before obviously I do the growth guide on those muscles in the future to maybe discuss some arm training tricks and tips for those of you who care to know them. But obviously before we do so, we're going to do the bits and bobs that need to be done, which is very much, if at any point throughout this entire video you decide to actually like the video and don't hate me, then please do consider liking the video because 1,300 likes is the goal. In addition to that, if you haven't already, I would really appreciate it if you did consider clicking the red button down below to subscribe to the channel and maybe even the bell next to it so you get notified when I upload every week, twice a week, because I really like seeing the TFNL family grow. It makes me very happy and I really appreciate you for being here and tolerating my waffle. And obviously at the end of the video I do comment question of the week in which I answer a question from a previous comment section. So if you have any questions you want me to answer, then drop it down below in the comment section. I shall do so. Video time, you can see what's oh, hat time, silly me. Firstly, looks okay. Secondly, a bit flaccid, but it looks okay. Secondly, it's bloody comfortable because it's elastic. Wow. What a day. Today we're looking at Sydney's 30-minute arms and abs workout, which is part of her Arise Day 5 workout session. It's an interesting one because obviously, like I said, we haven't really covered arms much before on the channel. There is obviously a bit of abs here and there. Although this workout does bring in some shoulders, we're not going to spend too much time on that. The primary focus is going to be the arm training with a bit of emphasis elsewhere, but this video is largely going to be a catalyst for that conversation and a catalyst for education, we'll say. So firstly, before we crack on, it makes sense for me to just very quickly talk about the two primary arm muscles we consider when we think about the arms. So typically we think about the biceps, which is obviously the muscle up here on the inside of the arms, which is very much responsible for elbow flexion, so bending the elbow against resistance. And then we also think about the triceps under here, so on the outside of the arms, which is very much responsible for elbow extension, so straightening that elbow against resistance. And although a lot of people do actually have the idea that the shoulders are part of the arms, that's not necessarily the case. The shoulders are the shoulders and the arms are the arms. The arms just kind of join into the shoulders via a ball and socket joint, which is essentially a joint that has that kind of free ball and socket movement, hence where you can do this, and go all over the place, rather than the elbow where you can kind of just do this and this mainly. The first move we're actually looking at today is a hammer curl. And although you're thinking, well, right, that is elbow flexion there, she is curling the weight against resistance, it's not as bicep dominant as you might think. And I'll say that. I should have worn a t-shirt for this video. Wait there. I'm changing t-shirts so you can see better. Top has been changed, so I'm actually wearing a t-shirt. Hopefully you can see better. So although the hammer curl is obviously going through that elbow flexion against resistance, the big thing to know is that wrist positioning. So you can see Sydney's curling with a neutral grip, hence hammer curl. And ultimately that neutral grip brings in an additional muscle that lies underneath the biceps called the brachialis. And because you're bringing that additional muscle, you actually take a little bit of emphasis away from the biceps themselves to then place it via the changing wrist positioning on that muscle underneath, like I said, being the brachialis. So I do think the hammer curl is a great movement, but again, maybe not as great for the biceps themselves as you might think, but largely your kind of arm shape, like the peak of the bicep, whatever you want to look at, is very much going to be genetic. Another thing to note is when you are doing a hammer curl very quickly, is you see how Sydney is curling directly up and down like so, like this, like this. I would tickle, flaring the elbows out slightly and curling ever so slightly across the body. You may find it to be better for you when doing hammer curl variations. So just try that. Instead of going up and down, try going across the body ever so slightly. Tickle that one time and tell me what you think. The movement around I don't think is necessary. I think this is probably Sydney not wanting to stand still for 90 seconds and just be there on camera. I think this is just to make it a bit more watchable, understandable. So now we're going to actually arguably probably one of my favourite bicep movements in the world, and that would actually be just a standard dumbbell curl. Again, this additional movement I think is largely for the video rather than any kind of additional bicep work, but now you see how Sydney's wrist positioning has changed, and she's adopted what we call a supinated grip. And supinated grip means your palms are facing away from you, they're facing up. So you see she's gripping like this. Doing so is a great time, because obviously a lot of times you see people like twisting, they're twisting, and as you twist, you actually take emphasis away from the bicep on the eccentric portion of the rep and place it more in the brachialis, which is obviously not what you want to do. So when looking at like really optimizing the effectiveness of a bicep movement, try and keep your wrist supinated at all times, like so. But don't try and over supinate. So your biceps can only really supinate to about here. Any additional supination like that, where you kind of fight into position, is a small muscle called the supinator, which does that additional supination. So I supinate to about here. I wouldn't stress about trying to really force yourself a bit further. I think it's a bit unnecessary, but the dumbbell curl like so is a really great movement. Like I said, it's probably one of my favourite. And I'll tell you why, I should probably save this for the growth guide, but I'll tickle it now. Is it very much works the biceps in their mid position. So obviously we know we've got the lengthened position where the majority of the tension is when the arm is straight, so we're lengthened and stretched out. We've got the short position where the majority of the tension is when the arm is bent and it's the muscle is contracted, being the biceps, and shortened, but there is also that mid position. And oftentimes when people do a dumbbell curl, they really get stuck around that midpoint, and some research is suggesting that the biceps may well in fact respond best and grow best in mid position dominance movements. I'll save the other tricks and tips of like what to do with the shoulders for a future video. I don't want to give away all the secrets now, so you don't have a need to watch the arm growth guide that's occurring eventually. So now we've got the triceps. You see how now Sydney is extending the elbow against resistance here, and this is what we consider a movement that would typically work the triceps in their lengthened position, because the majority of the tension is going to be when her arms are bent behind her, like there. With this movement, I would really try and focus on pausing at the bottom. So getting down and pausing and holding that. And also, don't be afraid to let the elbows flare. I think Sydney's really trying to keep her elbows in. Don't be afraid to let them flare naturally. Do you know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with that. And also, just don't bang yourself on the back of the head, because I've done that many times. I think the issue with walking around in this movement is because there's an overhead weight, this could throw off some stability. So ideally, you do want to be planted and locked in and making sure your core is braced and ready to go. Do I think it's an amazing movement? I think it's okay. If you had access to a gym, I would say I probably wouldn't do that movement, but for a home workout movement, I think it's okay. See, with the kickback again, so you were extending the elbow against resistance here, but due to Sydney's body positioning, there's not actually a lot of extension against resistance occurring, because if she were just to relax, the arm would go in the direction of gravity, which would nearly straighten it. So ideally, if you're going to do a kickback variation, you want to be as bent over as possible. So I would do one arm at a time, and I would lean against the dumbbell rack, so you can maintain that horizontal body position, get that elbow back, and really extend against resistance without the consideration of too much gravity aiding you. Leaning against the dumbbell rack also eliminates any lower back fatigue you may experience doing this, because obviously you're holding movements for about 90 seconds in this workout. So holding this position for 90 seconds, especially if you were to be a bit more bent over, is probably going to fatigue your lower back. Again, if you're at a gym, it's not a movement I would favour, because you're essentially replicating a push-down variation, but instead of using a cable, you're just bent over with the dumbbell. This additional pullover, I don't think is necessary. It brings in more of the chest than anything. So I'm unsure why Sydney is doing this, because there we go, that's what we're looking for, that skull crusher. She's changing her grip a lot. Ideally, you want to kind of find one grip and stick with it. Again, there's a lot of movement here. She's going from a pullover to a side-to-side skull crusher to a regular skull crusher. Again, I would just stick one dumbbell in each hand, like so. Boom, 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 just like so. I don't want you dead over yourself like here, so you'll literally hit yourself in the head, because that could cause some elbow pain. What we do is let the shoulders roll back slightly, then we can further lengthen the triceps, so stretch them out if you're able to, because obviously the floor is in the way, thus increasing the effectiveness of this skull crusher movement. And again, don't leave those elbows locked in. Let them come out. Not out here, but allow some natural flaring to occur. Similar to when we do like side raise variations and pressing variations, scapular plane about 30 to 45 degrees in front of you. But again, I think the skull crusher is a pretty decent movement. It's not my favourite, but I do like it. It's something I would include myself. And I'm not sure why Sydney is kind of linking the pullover with the tricep movement. I understand she's put it in the thing as a straight arm pullover to tricep extension, but the question is considering this is an arm workout, you've got to ask yourself why? Because a pullover, that movement, involves no additional flexion or extension of the elbow, therefore the triceps aren't having to to do any additional work through range of motion, what is actually going to be working more is probably going to be your pecs due to this pullover motion. So now we've gone into a curl to press combo movement. You already kind of know my thoughts about combo movements. I'm not a massive fan of them, but I do think for home workouts they certainly have more of a time and a place. Essentially, when it comes to arm training, we're kind of replicating what we've already done in the sense of we're doing another hammer curl. I'd be happy just doing a dumbbell curl and a hammer curl, to be honest. I don't think you need 3 movements if you don't want them. We're going to throw a bit of a cheeky additional section into here, which is going to be ab work, because obviously this workout also includes a lot of standing ab work, and you already know my thoughts on standing ab work. Sydney is doing a dumbbell overhead crunch, in which the dumbbell is like so, she's crunching down with it. So when we're looking at working the abs, as I've said before, we're looking at closing the gap between the sternum, which is up here, and the pelvis. So we're looking at either bringing the sternum to the pelvis, thus biasing the upper abs a bit more, or bring the pelvis to the sternum, thus biasing the lower abs a bit more. When you're standing, if you could completely relax, what would happen? You would essentially reduce the distance between your sternum and your pelvis. So gravity is pulling you down. If anything, the more weight you have above you, the more is actually going to aid with gravity and pull you down further. No matter how much weight you have above your head, this is not going to be a more effective movement. Gravity is bringing that sternum to the pelvis, not her pulling against weight. And then when bringing the pelvis to the sternum, the weight overhead is irrelevant, because you could have 100 kilos or 1 kilo, doesn't change what's happening down here. So again, unfortunately I would actually say this is quite a disappointing movement to see, and I would deem this to be not a very effective ab movement. I think a crunch variation should not be done standing, unless there is like maybe additional resistance through a cable machine perhaps, but a crunch variation like we've just seen would be much better if she were lying on the floor, therefore not working with gravity, but instead working against gravity, which is kind of what we want to do when we're thinking about resistance training. Although I've expressed how much of a fan I am of Sydney, doesn't mean I agree with everything that she is doing. Like with anyone, doesn't mean I agree with everything they're doing. And in this case, unfortunately, it is quite disappointing to see Sydney promoting something which I deem to be very ineffective. I understand during home workouts and when the equipment is limited, you are a bit limited, so it is tricky and it is hard, because Sydney's got to create content that's fun and exciting for everyone to watch, but isn't too repetitive and boring. Sadly, effective training is often repetitive and boring. If you don't want it to be, then you can certainly play around with variations and do whatever you want. Just because I don't necessarily deem the movement to be effective doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. I think ultimately it comes down to just doing movement you enjoy and just doing whatever you want that gets you moving, gets you happy, and just genuinely makes you feel good about yourself. Just because it's not optimal or effective doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. So as a whole, I think the arm work was actually alright, especially the bicep work. I was a really big fan of the hammer curls and the dumbbell curls. Great movements. The tricep work, not as ideal, but that being said, that's not as ideal if you had access to a gym. If you only had access to home workouts and dumbbells, I think the tricep movements, specifically the skull crushes and the overhead extensions that Sydney chose, are probably 2 of the better ones she could have chosen. In that sense, I think she's done a really good job with the arm work there, and hopefully this kind of video has maybe explained how the arms work and how you can maybe work them a bit more effectively, but I will again save the good juicy details for the growth guide that will occur in the future. But hopefully you managed to at least get something from this video, and hopefully it's managed to kind of keep you ticky over until I cover the arms in greater detail in the future, in which I'll further elaborate on the importance of different elbow positionings and the importance of working muscles in different positions, shortened, mid, lengthened, etc, etc. But now that's done, we're very quickly going to crack on with comment question of the week, and it's actually a light-hearted one and a bit of a fun one. So Moose asks, where would you most love to go on an all expenses paid vacation? See, there are 3 places that come to my mind: LA, somewhere in Australia, and somewhere in Japan. I've been to LA a few times. Again, it's not necessarily like my vibe per se, but fantastic gyms out there. Loads of food, sunny weather. I just had a really good time because I was there with my best friends, and it was probably the happiest time of my life when I last went in 2017. That kind of 2-week period we were there. I remember waking up every day, especially considering that was a very bad period for me personally with mental health. I'd wake up every day and just be thankful to just be in a place that I was happy to be in with the people I loved, being my best friends, which are the 2 individuals I used to do the older videos with. So for that, I think LA will always have a bit of a place in my heart, and I'd love to go back. Australia, I've got some friends in Australia, and I've always wanted to visit Australia. Gotta be honest with you, I've always been a bit of a loser. I really like snakes, I really like spiders, I really like things along those lines. Always have, even since I was a kid, and the thought of going somewhere with lots of dangerous snakes and spiders is very cool to me. And also it just seems like a really great place. One of my best friends moved there many years ago, and he loves it, and I'd love to actually be able to go visit him, as well as some of you guys who I do speak to. I'd love to be able to visit you and chat and train. The 3rd place, which is actually somewhere I'm hoping to go next year, is Japan. I think the idea of Japanese culture in my eyes just seems really cool and interesting. interesting to me anyway, and I think Japan itself just looks incredible. I'd love to visit Tokyo, I'd love to visit many places in Japan, and hopefully I will do so next year, because that is something I've been wanting to do since 2019, but obviously the pandemic hit and that kind of delayed plans, but we'll get there when the time is right. But you tell me, where would you most like to go on an all expenses paid vacation? Drop it down in the comment section, because I'd love to hear all of your location desires. That is it. That is the video. Like I said at the start of the video, if you like the video, then please let me know you like the video by liking the video. 1,300 likes is the goal, so if we reach that, that would be bloody splendid. I would very much appreciate it. If you haven't already, then please do consider clicking the red button down below to subscribe to the channel, and maybe even the bell next to it, so you get notified when I upload every week, twice a week on a Monday and a Thursday. And if you two have a question you want me to answer at the end of the next video, then please do consider drop it down below in the comment section for comment question of the week, and I shall do so. Thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating my hopefully beneficial knowledge bombs I've been trying to drop this video, and thank you for tolerating the video.